This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
All right, welcome back to another episode of How About That Podcast. It's Monday, April 8th when we're recording. It's Eclipse Day, so turn on Bonnie Tyler and listen to Total Eclipse of the Heart because this is a big day here. We're in the path of totality in Dallas. We're actually kind of about an hour away here from actually seeing if we'll have a full eclipse or not. The clouds are definitely in play here, but we'll see. Danny, is the Bay Area in the path of totality at all or no?
You know, to be honest, I haven't dived too deep into this eclipse talk. This is kind of the first I've talked about it.
Did you not know about the eclipse?
Well, I heard about it on social media and all that good stuff, but I'm not really an eclipser, I guess you'd call me.
You're not a Los Angeles eclipser?
No, I'm not.
See, Joey the other day pointed out that I say a lot. This is something I'm trying to work on. I was thinking about maybe getting a jar for ums, like the jar. Maybe we'll get one. Yeah, maybe we'll get one for bad dad puns too.
The eclipser?
The Los Angeles eclipser. Paul George, man.
I liked it.
Appreciate it, man. Another thing we're talking about is the idea of maybe shaving the beard and leaving a mustache. Danny, for those listening to the pod and not actually watching, Danny has an excellent firefighter mustache. Is it like standard uniform for your guys' firefighter outfit to have mustaches?
No, but yeah, it's a very strict policy. It's no more than ½ inch below the upper lip, so it's got to be very, very precise. But I'd say 80% of us have it.
So do you guys have like New York Yankees style? You could have a mustache, you can't have beard. Is it the same kind of rules and regulations there?
Pretty much. It's got to be a professional mustache. Can't have any handlebar, nothing like that. No soul patch, no goatee, nothing. Just simple, clean stash. Which, looking at your face, I can see the outline of one. If you just trim all that excess garbage around it, you can have a pretty nice mustache.
Yeah, no, my fiance says I look like ugly Freddie Mercury with a mustache. So we'll see if I eventually do that. She will let me do it for Halloween, so maybe we'll do one then. Joey, can you grow a mustache?
Not a good one. It's an embarrassing mustache, so I really don't do it because I would just embarrass myself.
But sometimes you got to embarrass yourself.
No, I get that. My go-to is to keep the like light beard and then trim the mustache so there's no mustache. I know there's a name for that. I forget what it is.
That sounds like some like mutton chops kind of thing you got going then.
No, it's not a mutton chops.
If you were to grow this out, connect it, and then have nothing here, I feel like there's some kind of 1800s look there then.
I don't think it can be connected if it's mutton chops. I think there's a clear cutoff.
Okay. You've got a nice strong chin though too, so I don't think you need the facial hair there.
I can't even grow a beard, so.
You can't grow a beard?
It's not pretty. I would equate it to Joey's mustache that he's talking about. It's patchy, it's thin. It just doesn't look good. You've had a beard since like 8th grade, Joe, so you wouldn't understand.
I know. The irony was I was losing hair up here and then just growing it a lot down here.
I'm glad you said it.
You thought it.
So you were a man child in middle school and high school? You were that guy?
No, because I don't have like a lot of like chest hair or anything. You know what I mean? Or like I got arm hair.
I've seen your legs, Joe. I've seen those legs. Those things got wool blankets wrapped around them.
Yeah, but I've had those for a long time. Like it's not like they've like grown more. I'm not trimming the leg hair. It's just a standard, and it's not too bad. It's not like fur.
No, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Cowboys podcast. That's what kind of podcast we have.
How about that?
How about that podcast? Thank you again for everyone who's tuning in so far. Reminder, we're trying to grow our listens so that I can do a Taco Bell mile. And I think that's what everyone wants to see. Joey, do you have an update? I didn't prep you with this. Did you have an update on how many downloads we've got so far? How close are we in our goal to 2,000?
Give me 7 seconds.
Okay. In the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit what we're going to do on this podcast. We're going to have a very, very fun interview with Blake Nill, the head coach of the University of British Columbia football team. Yes, that British Columbia, Canada. Blake Nill has done a fantastic job with that program out there. And the reason that we have him on the podcast today is because he's the coach of the perhaps best kept secret that is now out in the NFL draft process. Offensive lineman Giovanni Manu. And Danny, this guy's a freak. He had an incredible pro day. He is now has a visit with the Cowboys. Blake Nill has some fun stories. We had that conversation earlier talking about even the conversation that Giovanni had with Jerry Jones. One, Danny, what'd you think of that podcast interview and just the idea of Giovanni Manu in general?
He was great. Very friendly, very open. You could see the pride in his program and his players. It's like a big family. And for those of you that haven't seen or know who we are referring to, do yourself a favor. Look this guy up, Giovanni Manu. He is a beast. He's 6'8", 350, runs a sub 540. The guy is, like I said, he is a freak. And we would be very lucky to have him in Dallas. I think there were 16 out of the 32 teams there at his pro day, the Cowboys being one of them. And according to his coach, the scouts were very impressed by his performance.
Yeah, and he's not the only one. Blake Nill tells us about another player from British Columbia, from the University of British Columbia, the Thunderbirds, that the Cowboys met with. So a little bit of intel there. And this is what we call in the business, Danny, a tease. So be sure to listen to the Blake Nill interview. In addition to that, we're also just going to do some news and notes off the top. And then we're going to have what's on Morales' mind after the interview with Blake Nill. One thing we're not doing today is we're not doing the final round of Chase for the Rose. I know you worry that the rose might wilt if we don't get to it soon enough. Trust me, that thing is like Beauty and the Beast. It is preserved. It's in the little container. We are fine with it. It's going to be fine. Chase for the Rose is coming. Joey, remind the people, before you tell us how many downloads we have, because I think you have that information ready. Before we do that, tell us who the Chase for the Rose finale is.
The finale will feature the number 1 seed in Talisi Fuanga, offensive tackle from Oregon State. And then Byron Murphy, I'm blanking. What was he, the 6th seed? 7 seed. My apologies. 7 seed Byron Murphy, the 2nd defensive tackle from Texas. So we got a battle of the offensive line and the defensive line, which have obviously been our 2 biggest discussions while making our way through this bracket.
Fantastic. Great preview there from the great Third Eye Raven and breaker of ties himself. Joey, how many downloads do we have thus far?
Across all platforms, YouTube included, we have 188 views / downloads.
So we got to pump those numbers up, people. We got to, Wolf of Wall Street style. We got to pump that up. It's rookie numbers, but we are rookies at the end of the day. So let's get to the news and notes then section. And to be honest with you, Danny, there's only really one piece of news and note that I kind of wanted to talk about today, and it's not really newsworthy, but it is at the same time. It's not really shocking. Dallas Morning News reporter Michael Gelkin wrote today that on Monday, April 8th, that CeeDee Lamb is expected to miss voluntary minicamp, or the first voluntary workouts, coming in about a month. Danny, 1, does that surprise you? 2, what are your thoughts on that idea, though?
That was a headline that came across my Twitter or X, and I didn't want to believe it at first because it's just adding insult to injury to what has already been a rough offseason. But I don't blame CD for wanting to get paid. He's arguably top 3, top 2 wide receivers in the game. He's got all the leverage in the situation, similar to Dak. And I think he has earned the right to do that at the expense of the Cowboys.
Yeah, but it's not really surprising to you to see this. This kind of seems like the MO for players in contract deals.
It seems par for the course.
I also think it's notable that we've really only seen from that draft class, and this could change. Again, reminder, Monday, April 8th, 1 player get a fat deal from that first round draft class, and that was Jerry Jeudy, of all people, who's been traded to Cleveland. So we're still trying to see where the market sets. Danny, do you buy the idea that maybe we have to see Justin Jefferson get paid before we see CeeDee Lamb get paid?
Yes and no. I would say they're very comparable players, but I wouldn't be opposed to paying your guy first. You can set the market as opposed to seeing what Justin Jefferson gets and then going from there, because you can only imagine he's going to want to start with Justin Jefferson money and see if he can get more. So if we can get this deal done long term, I would be all for that.
Yeah, I think the more we go forward on this free agency talk with CeeDee Lamb, it's more expensive it's going to get. That's something we talked about with Joey Ikes and why it's fortuitous to really sign players early, something the Cowboys haven't really done. And you kind of see a little bit of the, pains of that, moving forward.
Sorry, if I'm not mistaken, he was the same class as Brandon Ayuk, correct?
Correct. Who's also is still in a contract discussion. One thing I think we'll talk about later, not today. What if CeeDee Lamb plays on the 5th year option? That's something will happen with Brandon Ayuk. What if they just can't come to an agreement? And they even, that they set the deadline for that literally. I believe the 5th year option, somewhere between $15 to $17 million for CeeDee Lamb. So one thing that we should keep an eye on moving forward. But as of now, and in my opinion, not very surprising news, CeeDee Lamb expected to not be at the first voluntary workouts for the Cowboys.
It doesn't surprise me either, especially being in 49er territory around here and everyone talking about Brandon Ayuk and all that drama and controversy. I couldn't help but think in the back of my mind, CD could be next.
Yeah, the interesting about that, Dan, though, is that we haven't heard a lot about CeeDee Lamb.
No, not at all, which was surprising because it was a little worrisome, and I knew the day would come, and the day has come.
Hey, sometimes you got to pay the piper, right? In this case, you got to pay CD. So with that being said, let's move into our conversation with University of British Columbia head coach Blake Nill. Little spoiler, he's also the cousin of Stars GM Jim Nill. So there's multiple Dallas connections here to keep an eye on as we talk with Blake Nill. But we're going to talk Blake Nill, Giovanni, Manu, and another secret player that the Cowboys might be interested in coming up right now. And now we're going to go up north to Blake Nill, who's the head coach at UBC, the University of British Columbia. And the reason we're having Blake Nill on the podcast is because the Cowboys have been showing some interest in not only one of those players of his, but two. Blake, first off, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Joe, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. And a little bit about Blake, just to give you a little bio of him. Head coach at UBC. They played in the Vanier Cup last season for the second time in his tenure at UBC. They won the Vanier Cup. Was it 2016, Blake?
2015, we're Vanier national champions. Yeah, national champions 2015. Runners-up, lost it this year to the University of Montreal.
Yeah, so Blake is basically running Alabama or Georgia up in Canada, and he's got a lot of success up there. Also, the cousin of Stars, here's a local connection, cousin of Stars GM Jim Nill. What a small world, Blake.
Small world. Jim Nill and I, first cousins. Our dads were business partners. We grew up in the middle of nowhere in Hanna, Alberta. And I think the only guy that's listening to this podcast, if he is, would be Jim, who knew where Hanna, Alberta is. The Stars owner might, but it's quite a coincidence. And I was just actually with Jim last Thursday. He brought Dallas in and they beat the Canucks, and he was pretty pumped up.
So Blake, the important question here: Stars fan, or do you have some natural allegiances to Canada? What's your team right now?
No, man. Family first. I think Jim and I go way back. We were both pros at the same time. We're pretty close, more like brothers. Our fathers were business partners, so we saw a lot of each other growing up. And he's doing a hell of a job there, man. I'm proud of him.
Yeah, they've been a fun team to watch. We'll see how far they go this year. Obviously, a great run last season. They're knocking on the door of a Stanley Cup there. We'll see what happens. But back to you, Blake. You were also a third-round pick in the CFL in 1983. Played, I think, 6 seasons in the CFL. got into coaching and have had an incredibly successful run. And that's kind of led us to today, where you also have a couple pro prospects, including one that's kind of is being referred to as the best kept secret in the draft, but the secret seems to be out a little bit on Giovanni Manu, a 6'8", 350-pound offensive lineman who ran a 4.9 340-yard dash at his pro day and a 33.5-inch vert. For perspective, Danny Morales was a 5'8" offensive lineman in high school and could not even run a 5 flat. So a freak athlete we got there in Giovanni. Just a quick lowdown. What would be your initial scouting report, and what would you tell scouts about the player that Giovanni has become at UBC and what he could project at in the NFL?
Well, Joe, what you said is sort of like the secret's out with Gio. I can tell you with confidence that those NFL scouts that were at our pro day last 2 Fridays ago were there. They knew about Gio, but they were there to see Theo. And Theo Benedet's been the lineman of the year in our country 2 years in a row. I've told everyone, Gio, I've referred to Gio as the top football athlete in our country. And, everyone looked at me, a little strange given who his teammate was. And, but I'll tell you, when I just got off the phone with Sports Illustrated, I was talking to this, and this is the story I said when those scouts, when Gio stepped on the scale and the guy from Denver screamed out 352 pounds, you could see all of a sudden this attention started going to the scale. And when he jumped, the first thing they did is he jumped. Theo got up, jumped 34 inches, which is very good. And then the big guy gets up there and he does 33 and a half. And I have a picture of the representative for Chicago and New Orleans sitting there, and their eyes are as big as saucers. And at that point, the secret was out. And then over the next 2 hours between, the 40s, the T-tests, the bench, and then the agility drills, those two were just competing for they're great teammates. They feed off one another. And it was a great showcase of two outstanding line athletes who I think are both going to be in the NFL in the future years.
One thing, Blake, that as someone who covers the NFL, I always find very fascinating is, when these players go undrafted or they, 7th round picks, and you kind of look at, hey, this team discovered this person, right? Well, I always think of it, hey, not only did this team discover this person, but you go back 4 years ago before that, and some college coach took a chance on him. It doesn't seem like that he was an easy chance to take on, it seems like, with Gio. I know he averaged 30 and 10 on the basketball court. Obviously, when you have a 6'8", 310-pound guy, I think at the time being that athletic and light-footed, it kind of signals that he could be a playmaker. Tell me a little bit about his recruiting journey, when you first met him, discovered him, and how excited you were to get him on campus.
Well, I heard about this basketball kid at Pitt Meadows, which is about an hour from our stadium, and then went and got on our radar. Went and watched him play. He was late into football. The unique thing about Gio is most when I met Gio, the lady responsible for Gio was his sister. Like, Gio's parents are on the island, and so they're a long ways away. So Gio's being raised by his sister, who's 5 or 6 years older, not much, and so you can understand what it's like when there's no, let's say, a father figure or whatever in his household. And so he's pretty easygoing guy, honestly. And then when I met the kid, I was just blown away with his genetic skills and his personality. And I told him, man, we gotta focus on something other than being the big basketball star at Pitt Meadows. And I was able to convince him to take an academic strategy that wasn't the easiest for him. All on the premise, man, that at some point we would have this be having this discussion about his potential as a football athlete.
With guys like Gio, you look at him now, and there's not many people at the combine that can move like him. And we're talking about guys from Alabama and Georgia, and we're talking about his secret coming out now. Just one question, and maybe forgive me if this is an ignorant one. How does a guy like that also not maybe garner interest from some of the schools down here, some of the SECs? I mean, I feel like, one look at him, it's like, oh man, that guy belongs to be in the SEC or something like that.
You know what, Joe? You can say that's absolute. Like University of Washington's we're 2 hours from the campus, right? I know those two tackles of mine right now can play the game, and it is. I don't understand why there's not more interest. There's starting to become more and more interest in the Canadian athletes. It's just numbers, right? Like our population just doesn't have the same base as the US, but there are the young men up here that can play and compete at the best down in the US, right?
Yeah, and then, another thing too is we talk about all this talent, and you said it like, hey, I hoped one day that eventually we'd be able to talk about him with the NFL prospects. In terms of his development as a football player, obviously basketball player in high school with some football kind of thrown there a little bit, it seemed. How did you see him kind of from the first day he stepped on campus to this pro day develop into the player that he eventually became?
Well, Joe, he's a very young, like when I say young, I mean, again, father figures are important, especially in some cases, and especially in the game of football. The game of football has to be played with a level of physicalness, a level of violence that just has to occur for you to be amongst the best. And this kid came to me tremendously respectful young man. We needed to get some edge out of him, and for him to see his potential. There are two people I give a lot of credit to that helped me with that. I'll take credit for being the father figure of sorts, but my strength and conditioning coach, who's got a NCAA background, played D1 at Utah, I believe, when Urban Meyer was at Utah. He brought out the man in him, the physical potential. And then my offensive line coach is a gentleman named Dan DeRazio, who has a 30-plus year career in the NCAA and a 20-plus year career up here in Canada. I was able to convince Coach DeRazio to come out of retirement and work with these two young men, and I think that made a huge difference in their technical development in a very short period of time. And again, that has to be part of the formula why we're having this talk right now.
Yeah, Blake, I got a question for you. So from a Cowboys perspective, there's quite a few glaring holes on the O-line. And at 6'8", 352, Gio's got that prototypical left tackle size. What do you see as his best position at the next level?
You know what, Danny? I asked all the scouts that because I also wanted to make sure that we're preparing him for this opportunity. Most of the scouts told me right tackle is where they see him as. Okay, that may have changed now that they've seen him move. But that's what I've been told by numerous people that represent teams is that he was a right tackle. That may change, but he's definitely a perimeter. I'm going to be on the outside line. He has extraordinary length and extraordinary movement skills. He's not gonna get run by. I'll tell you that. When he's exposed to the level of compete that the NFL requires and the level of coaching that he still is going to need coaching. One comment I just made to another media group is that if you had to take both guys that I have right now, Danny, in fact, Dallas has shown tremendous interest in Theo Benedet too. And Theo, if you had to throw him on the field today, you probably would go with Theo. Right now, Theo, I think, is fundamentally at a higher level than Gio. A notch ahead of him. But in 2 years of being exposed to high-level coaching, high-level compete expectations, I just believe that the toolkit that Giovanni Manu has, the focus that he has, he's a very I mentioned this earlier. The two have competed their whole career for the acclaim. They're best buddies. They're great teammates with one another. Theo's a very strong advocate of Gio and vice versa. But Gio's starting to come out. He's starting to feel the value that he potentially can bring programs. And I'll tell you what, he's going to be someone to deal with in the future if he's managed correctly. Danny, here's a great story I'll tell you. With all my old linemen, we're a development program, so we don't get a lot of, let's call, 5-star recruits. We may get a few more now, but a big problem we have at UBC is admission. We're like Stanford. We're like an Ivy League type school. So when we get kids in, they're typically they have to have a strong academic component as well. And so you don't get a lot of guys who are ready to play right away. I have shown the clip of Larry Allen running that guy down in that game. I bet you 100+ times to my young old lineman. And I can remember showing this to Giovanni one year and saying, Gio, you want to know something? They didn't know who Larry Allen was. Like, he wasn't a D1 player. And he wasn't, he came on late. I don't know. I can't say I know about a lot about him, but just what I show on YouTube. But I've shown Gio that tape probably 20 times. And I'm saying this is what can happen when all of a sudden people start believing in you. And I really think this is, now that people know about him, they're going to have to compete for him. I was laughing. He came back on last Thursday, and he called me when he was done his meeting with Dallas. And I said, okay, he was a little, the kid hasn't been into a lot of these, especially on his own, right? And he called me, and I said, okay, how'd it go? And he goes, Coach, I did exactly what you said. And I had told you, make sure you go in there with confidence, understand what you've accomplished. And these guys are strong enough. They've dealt with enough young men to know what they're looking for. And he said, Coach, I looked at Mr. Jones in the face and I told him, you take a shot at me, sir, and I'll change your program. And, from Gio's side of the story, he says, what did he say? And he said, Coach, or he said, Gio, who told you to say that? And he said, my coach did. And he said, he's saying the right things. And that's what I want Gio to understand is that, and I want teams to understand is this guy's a freak. And he's a young man who just needs, he needs some mentorship. He needs to be told, okay, hands got to go here, to be a technician. But I'm pretty convinced both of them are going to have their day down there for sure.
Blake, forgive me if I'm maybe it might be the Wi-Fi. It seems you're very passionate about just what the person that Gio and Theo have become, the way they've battled against each other and the way that they've gotten to this point. Why does that mean so much to you as a coach to see how they've gone here?
Because Joe, up in Canada, we're like up in Canada, it's a little different. I think I'd be the same down. Like, I'm very invested in my men. I've coached, I've been in a national championship each of the last 4 decades and with 4 different teams. And I think a lot of reason for my strength has been my commitment to my kids for a life. Like when they make a commitment to me, I feel I've got to commit to them, and they're different. Theo Benedet comes from a complete different set of circumstances as Giovanni. Giovanni, he came to you as a young man. It was him and his sister in an apartment 30 minutes from campus, and the kid just needed he had a few more hurdles to go through, a few more, academic. I always talk about the academic strength of this school. Like, we got to keep that kid in school too. That took an effort, but to his credit, he has grown up in front of our faces, and you're like a father to these kids over the years, and to see them excel, no matter who it is, Joe, it's just a great feeling, right?
One thing that we talk about, Blake, a lot is like the standard for players. And I think when you have two guys that are very competitive, but also trying to push each other, that creates a new standard. What was it like watching Gio and Theo compete off the field? Obviously, they're on the same team, but it seems they both were very ambitious and had goals.
Oh, they do. Like, they compete again. They're best of buddies, right? Like, they all they've got each other's backs. Imagine Gio. Theo has been lineman of the year in our country 2 consecutive years. And you got Gio, on the other side of the line, like wondering, where's my love? And he'd come up to me and he would be emotionally go, Coach, what am I doing wrong not to garner the same level of national interest? And I'd explain to him, kid, it's subjective. We're not voting on it. These are people in the press, in the media, fellow coaches who are voting on them. Ultimately, it's going to come down to your ability to take charge and to build your own brand. And your day will come. And like I said, gentlemen, that pro day, most of the interest in that pro day was for Theo Benedet, which was well-deserved. No one in our country has ever done what he's done as an offensive line athlete. And out of the blue, this hulking young man just made a presence, and he's not a secret anymore. And now Giovanni is going to have to manage expectations, manage a higher level of accountability. He's going to have to grow up quicker, and but I think he's ready, gentlemen. I really believe if he's put in the right program, the right franchise, and they understand what they have, I think it could be something special for this kid.
Well, Blake, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Giovanni and Theo, two stories that we're definitely going to be following in this draft. I'll tell you what, Blake, I didn't have a U Sports team before this, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on the UBC Thunderbirds moving forward.
Hey, well, I better tell you, Joey, I got an old lineman in Dallas right now, so we better have been already, man. But like Dakota Shepley is a UBC Thunderbird too. Yeah, so you might have two of them there, right? So, but I appreciate, man. I appreciate truly you giving the brand Canadian football some help build the brand up here, and thank you both. All three of you, Joey. I shouldn't forget about the producer. Geez, thank you both. All three of you. Yeah.
Awesome, Blake. It was a joy talking with you. Thank you so much. And keep an eye on Lone Star Live for more about Giovanni, Manu, Theo Benedet, and kind of their journey to possibly come to Dallas. Thunderbirds fly south maybe for fall. We'll see. So thank you again, Blake. And now we're back. That was an awesome conversation with Blake Nill. I'll tell you, man, it's funny when you start thinking of things from like a Canadian versus American perspective in terms of college football, because hearing him, all I could think was, man, they have an incredible program up there. To the likes of things that we follow here in America, but it's a little bit of a secret. I personally, I didn't even know UBC was a school, if I'm being completely honest, until the Giovanni Manu news came out. My Canadian football knowledge outside of the CFL was very limited, but that was very insightful, very cool conversation with Giovanni Manu's head coach.
BC produced Cowboys' own Dakota Shepley. So There's a little insight for you.
The Thunderbirds, man, they fly south, I guess, for football.
They're cranking out the O linemen. It's the next O line U.
O-line U, eh?
Watch out.
Sorry.
Watch out, Iowa and Wisconsin. BC Thunderbirds are coming for you.
My question is why the Big Ten didn't add UBC at the end of the day. That's what should have happened. That
their
would have
loss.
been fun. Or maybe the new Pac-12. Why don't you just dip into Canada?
I could see him in the Mountain West, maybe.
Yeah, I could see Giovanni, Manu going head to head with Washington State and Oregon State. So that's my opinion. But again, thank you to Blake Nill for coming on the pod. Was fantastic. All right, now we're going to get into our closing segment. Reminder, we're not doing Chase for the Rose today. Subsequent reminder, go to Lone Star Live for all draft content and Cowboys content. We'll be posting a lot in the lead up to the draft. So don't worry about that. But now let's go to our closing segment. Something we've kind of titled, What's on Morales' Mind? A little alliteration there for you. And basically, we're giving the great Danny Morales, the voice of the people, the heartbeat of Cowboys fanhood himself, a chance to talk about what's on his mind.
Some unfortunate news came across the past couple of days, and it was a draft crush of my own, a player that I could see the star on his helmet at D tackle for the Cowboys, and that was T'Vondre Sweat. Over the weekend, got a DWI. Not all the details are out, so I don't want to speak on that too much, but what does that do to his draft stock? Is he still someone the Cowboys are going to consider? Is he completely off their board? I can't say for sure how they view that. For me, I don't know if he's even draftable anymore. If you can make a decision like that at this point, when you're under the biggest spotlight, and to make a decision like that, it's very questionable. It's unfortunate because it's a player that I think would fill a major need for the Cowboys, and he fits perfectly. But the decision making, the maturity, all those intangibles that supersede the talent, he's off my board. I don't know what you think about that, Joe, but
It's interesting because to your point, you're putting yourself in the shoes of the Cowboys in this case, and you're saying, you know what, this close to the draft, I don't want to even, that's not something I wanted to see, and that would outvalue some other things. I think moving forward, the Cowboys are going to have to, and the rest of the NFL is going to have to look at this case once the details are out and be like, hey, is it worth? Because at the end of the day, I think often, and this is completely different, apples and oranges. But do you remember how crazy it was when Laramie Tunsil, that video of Laramie Tunsil came out, like 10 minutes before the draft when he was going to be the number 1 overall pick?
The famous gas mask?
Could you imagine, and I forget who was on the clock at number 1 that year, and I think it was pretty projected that he was either going to be number 1, top 3, but can you imagine, okay, now we have to dig with it. We had 10 minutes until we get on the clock. We got to dig and try to find out information as fast as possible. Can you imagine how insane that was for draft rooms thinking of drafting Laramie Tunsil then?
Oh, that's got to be so stressful. It's just, this is the point in your life where you need to be the cleanest. People are going to be digging as deep as they can to find whatever they can, looking for reasons not to draft you. And to make a decision like that is concerning. But I will say, if you look at the pre-draft process of someone like Randy Gregory, he had his fair share of slip-ups, and the Cowboys took a chance on him. Or you look at someone not in the draft, but a player that had a questionable background in Greg Hardy, and Jerry Jones giving him a chance. So he's off my board, but that doesn't matter. It's what the Cowboys are going to do, and they seem like second chance. They're the guys who like to give second chances. And I don't think he's off their board. I really don't. I think that's something they could probably look past.
It's the age-old thing of, hey, your value is this high, right? Does this one thing overcome what I think of your value? Or am I willing to look past it because of how your talent is? So, obviously, big mistake from T'Vondre Sweat. We'll see what happens with that. Very talented player. But we'll see how the Cowboys and the rest of the NFL evaluates. Just another thing right before the draft process. And one thing I'll note is final impressions matter. First impressions matter, but so do final impressions. There's a reason why in writing you're supposed to put the most impactful thing at the end of the sentence. It's because it gets you to kind of think and it leaves a certain taste in your mouth. You don't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth weeks until the draft. So good thought, Danny. Good. The mind of Morales, the heartbeat of the Cowboys fan, is always strong, is always just, is always right. So thank you again for listening to our podcast. Again, we're in the rookie status. We're going to pump those numbers up, though. I want to run this Taco Bell mile, so make me do it. At the end of the day, we'll see what happens. But thank you again, and that's another episode of How About That Podcast.
Thanks for listening to How About That Podcast.